God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. It causes tension, mistakes, pain, and even struggle. The life of David is a great example of this. God is in the struggle, and the struggle is real.
I want to read this psalm to you, this verse. It's so good. It says this, Psalm 59, 16 and 17 says this, "But I will sing of your strength. In the morning I will sing of your love. For you are my fortress, my refuge in times of trouble. You are my strength. I sing praise to you. You, God, are my fortress, my God on whom I can rely." Isn't that a good verse? Don't you love that verse? You just want to take a pic next to a coffee, right? And just post it for all the world to see, just in a beautiful filter. That's one of those verses, right? It just makes you all warm and fuzzy on the inside. You start your day like that. I don't know if some of you do that, but maybe you start your day with a verse like this, and it's just, yes, I love that verse. And you start your day well, and you're going well, and you're on the road from where you are to where God is calling you to be that day. But Satan tries to trip you up sometimes, right? You know that the enemy's out to get you, that he's like a roaring lion prowling around seeking whom he may devour, right? And so all of a sudden, on the road to where you are, to where God's calling you to be, you decide to go into a gas station and you want to fill up some gas, and all of a sudden you see something like this. It just says, "No card read, see cashier." And you're like, oh man, the struggle just got real, right? You enter in, God forbid you walk 30 feet and wait in a line, right? So we're in a series right now called The Struggle is Real, and we're looking at the life of David, but all throughout our life, we experience these times and these moments of just struggle. And Psalm 59 is actually a chapter, it's a psalm that David writes right when he's in the middle of a struggle, when the struggle is real. And it's in the context of a story in 1 Samuel 19 that we're about to look at, when he had an encounter with King Saul, the current king at the time. And this encounter was real. The struggle was real. And then he writes this psalm. So knowing that, let me read it once again, Psalm 59, verses 16 and 17. "But I will sing of your strength. In the morning I will sing of your love, for you are my fortress, my refuge in times of trouble. You are my strength. I sing praise to you. You, God, are my fortress, my God on whom I can rely." Let me just say this right from the beginning. God is your refuge in trouble, not from trouble. God is our refuge in trouble, not from trouble. There's another guy in the Bible, in the New Testament, named Paul. You may have heard of him. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul is praying for what he refers to as the thorn in his flesh to be removed from his life. Get this out of here. He's praying for it to go away, and God says, "No, my grace is sufficient for you." In another story, Jesus is in the garden and he's praying, "Lord, let this cup pass from me." But then he says, "But not my will, let your will be done." And I think so many times we are praying for the troubles in our life to just be gone, but God often has a very different plan for us. And so understanding that he's our refuge in trouble, not necessarily from trouble, and that understanding alone will help so many of us today that there may be situations that God does not remove you from, the troubling situations that he may or may not take you from, but he'll always be there in those troubling situations. But let me just say this real quick, just this whole idea of this times of trouble. I think so many times we think that we're in a season of trouble. Listen, we're really just in training. I think so many times I find this to be so true in my life and in other people's, where it's not really a season of trouble. It's really just a season of training. Again, I look at that verse that I mentioned with Paul in 2 Corinthians 12, this other story in the New Testament, and this thorn in his flesh. I'll just read the verse real quick to you. It's not on the screen. 2 Corinthians 12:7, it just says, therefore, this is Paul, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I love that, I was given, it's a gift, Merry Christmas, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan. And then he says this, to torment me, to torment me, to torment me. Times of trouble are often times of training. And I noticed, and I actually learned this earlier before today, the word torment, real quick, the word torment, switch the syllables. Mentor. I'm just looking at mentor. I think so many times God will use a tormenting situation in your life to mentor us, a troubling situation in life to train us. And I think sometimes we find ourselves right there in that struggle. David, when he was a boy, he was anointed as king as a boy, and it wasn't until years later when he was an adult that he actually became king. And here's something to just note down. The anointed time is not always the appointed time in your life. The time that you may be called and anointed to do something, it's not always the appointed time. There is a time in between, a process that God allows us to go through. And certainly God allowed David to go through before he actually became and was appointed king. Sure, it was troubling, but man, it was also a season of training during that time. The time in between was training ground for David. And I think so many times we value being discovered over being developed. We value being discovered over being developed in our life, and our zeal to have it right now clouds our judgment, man. It clouds our judgment because, listen, we just want to arrive. We just want to get there. We just want to be there. We don't want to have to go through any of the training and the tormenting and the struggle. But to arrive without the proper training would be a complete disaster. And our good God knows that. Our loving Father understands what is best for us. And so, yes, David was anointed as a boy. And it was also, listen, it was in public. Everyone saw it. It was a great anointing service for all to see. And just in case anybody had any question about David, he proved it when he killed Goliath, right? We know this story. He proved it. So now he's not only been anointed as king, but now he's just had the greatest success he's ever experienced, the greatest success story that anyone has ever seen in the land ever before. So much so that people started to write songs. This is Bible. People started to write songs. David kills his tens of thousands, and King Saul his thousands. I mean, this song was popular. I mean, it hit number one on iTunes the first week. Like it was, if David had a shoe line, everybody would be wearing his shoes. Right? This is it. I mean, if you're David, you're going like, certainly the time is now, Lord. Certainly, I've just had the greatest success. I'm ready. But that's not what happens. And the time that David kills Goliath, greatest success moment, right? To when he became king, 16 years would pass. 16 years. I mean, we can't even wait 16 minutes for our coffee. That's too long, right? 16 years of struggle, of troubling times, of training. Let me ask this question. How many of us have experienced and maybe been graced and blessed by God with a huge giant of success? We've had these moments where, yes, it's so successful, it's great, I've arrived, God is good, only to be followed by a season of struggle. and some of the greatest struggles you've ever experienced. I mean, I find this all the time. And this is often what we see, the reward, the victory for David killing Goliath. The reward was more battles, more struggles, more troubling times. Every time David was successful, it would arouse King Saul's jealousy and bitterness and hate for David, that he actually tried to kill David on multiple occasions. So the reward for David's success was just more struggle, more battles. But how many of us understand, listen, that is so true, that pattern is so true in life. Struggle often follows success. So before you post your engagement pictures, understand that reward for engagement is marriage. And listen, it ain't always easy. It's sometimes hard. Right? The process of becoming one in marriage is much grittier than the prospect of walking down an aisle. Those of us who've been married for a period of time, we understand that. Right? So you get the promotion. The reward, you get to manage people. And guess what? People suck. Amen. Right? Or you see that. You buy the new house. The reward, you get to clean it. Right? You get pregnant. The reward, you get to raise your kids. It ain't always easy, people. Okay? Someone once told me grandkids are God's gift for not killing your own kids. I'm like, I kind of believe that. So listen. The presence of God is not the absence of trouble. He's often found right in the middle of it all. This is why, listen, your greatest testimonies will always come from your greatest tests. Every time. I wanted to say this, and I wanted to say all of this, really, just because I think it's so important to understand David's struggle, or we will misunderstand his strength. And so I want to show you just one test, one struggle with David in that time in between, that 16 year, from when he was anointed and then killed Goliath to when he became king, this period of time that many of us don't even realize. We sometimes read the story of David and we go, David killed Goliath and then became the greatest king of Israel. But there's a 16-year period. It's not like David killed Goliath and then went to the beach, right? It was not like that. And so I want us to look at one of these tests, one of these struggles, because I think we are often found right there in the land in between where we are and where God is calling us. And there's this gas station, this pit stop, this detour that we were not expecting. And we find David right here. So 1 Samuel chapter 19, 8 through 10, verses 8 through 10. It says this: war broke out again after that. Again, more battles, more struggles again. And David led his troops against the Philistines. He attacked them with such fury that they all ran away. I love that. But one day when Saul was sitting at home with spear in hand, the tormenting spirit from the Lord suddenly came upon him again. As David played his harp, Saul hurled his spear at David, but David dodged out of the way, and leaving the spear stuck in the wall, he fled and escaped into the night. Now let me tell you something that you probably already know. David is a masterful, skilled warrior of God. Fighting Philistines, listen, was easy for David. Was easy for David. I read all these stories, and it was always, he wasn't just winning against the Philistines. It was a landslide. It was a shutout. And from an early age, David possessed this physical talent, this ability to be this great warrior for God. I mean, there aren't too many boys that killed a bear, a lion, and a giant with a rock. You get me, right? This is a skilled young man. Talented young man. So listen, if you're going to throw a spear at David, don't miss. All right, you feel me? Because David has acquired, a particular set of skills over a long career. Skills that make him a nightmare for people who throw spears at him like Saul, right? You get what I'm saying? David is Liam Neeson in Taken. You know what I'm saying? David is Jason Bourne, right? The skills that he possesses. That's David, right? But I love this story, this picture, because it says, it's so clear that Saul has a spear in his hand. He's sitting at home, spear in his hand. David, he's playing the harp. He has his hand on a harp, on strings. Let me ask this question. What's in your hand today? When the struggle gets real for you, what do you decide to grab a hold of in those moments? You see, because listen, it would have been so easy for David, the mightiest warrior in the land, the skilled warrior, to take the spear that was stuck in the wall and throw it back. I mean, it's been so easy, but he doesn't do that. And I'm reading the story, I'm going, what? David. I mean, how hard is it to have the reputation of a giant killer and the greatest warrior in the land and not throw back, not throw the spear back, not fight back? How hard is it? And here's the thing, everything in David's environment was telling him, throw it back, throw it back. I just made a list of a couple things. He could have easily justified it. Saul threw it first, so it's self-defense. The jury would have seen that. It's self-defense now. God had already anointed him king, and he had been waiting for years now. Come on, certainly I've had the patience, Lord. I've waited long enough. David knows, if he didn't know up until this point, he now knows that Saul is not a suitable king for Israel. He's not a godly king for Israel. At least at this point, he's realizing this. So now, Lord, your people need a godly person, a godly leader. It's for them, right? Everybody already knows that David is the next king. He already had the favor and trust of the army and the soldiers and the people. I mean, the people would have easily followed David. Everything in David's environment in this moment was saying, throw it back, David. Everyone would have been okay with that. And I think so many times, listen, we find ourselves right here in this struggle, where we have all the freedom in the world to fight back, all the justification and reasons to throw the spear back, right? We see it, we go, oh, this must be the opportunity God has given me to take matters into my own hands, right? This is what he's called me to. And we find ourselves in this struggle. And sometimes it's so simple. We see a post on social media that we disagree with, so we throw a spear back. We get a text or we get an email, and we throw a spear back. We have an interaction with someone, or we're in a meeting that someone says something hurtful, and we get the spear, and we throw it back. And the culture around us is screaming, throw it back, fight for yourself. And everything in his environment is right here. And man, it is so justifiable from our point of view to throw the spear back. It reminded me of another story when Jesus was arrested before he went to the cross. A group of soldiers came to arrest Jesus. Peter steps up to defend Jesus. That's the right thing, right? You should defend Jesus, right? He takes the sword to defend Jesus. He swings and he slices a soldier's ear off. Jesus picks up the ear, miraculously heals this man, looks at Peter and says, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. And I think Jesus here would say, those who live by the spear will die by the spear. But listen, I got to be honest with you. I read this story, and I was reading it over and over and over and over, and I got to admit, like Saul had a spear in his hand, David had a harp. Which do you want when you're in battle, right? I'm like, when you're struggling, which do you want? I'm like, it's like, okay, rock, paper, spear. I want the spear, right? I'm just being honest. Like, I read it, and I'm like, and that struggle, man, I find myself there sometimes. So Saul threw the spear, it hits the wall, it misses David. David dodges. And then David has a very crucial decision here. And he doesn't decide to throw it back. David sees this, he has this, the struggle is so real in this moment. I can almost feel it, right? But as a man after God's own heart, he doesn't do that. He doesn't throw it back. He kept his hands on the strings, and he immediately leaves, writes Psalm 59, and worships God. Why would David decide to worship when he could have shown his warrior, right? Why would David sing when he could have thrown a spear? Here's the thing. The greatest battles that David fought weren't standing in front of him, they lived within him. And I think David knew that. The greatest battles lived within him. Let me change the characters real quick on you. Saul. Saul throws the spear at David. Who is Saul really fighting? See, I think so often the battle is not with them, it's within. It's within. And we get a glimpse, the scripture kind of gives us a glimpse that Saul's heart, Saul's motive, that his heart became jealous and bitter and resentful and hatred and violent toward David. And listen, if you're hearing this story and you're like me, you kind of find you want to be David. You do. We all do. We all want to be David. But man, sometimes I'm Saul. Man, I just want to grab that spear. I'm pretty good with words, right? You know, I see things online, I'm like, oh man. You just have this struggle, right? And you just want to throw the spear. And if you're like me, you're looking at the story and you're going, I'm sometimes like Saul. I mean, I'm like David sometimes, but I'm sometimes like Saul. And if that's here, the reality is, listen, the reality is yes. The struggle is real for both Saul and David, but both choose very different ways to respond. Saul is a walking, talking civil war, and he's taken out the closest available target. Man, how many times have we allowed this inner struggle, right, to boil up within us only to lash out on the people closest to us? How many times have we yelled at our kids when really we're screaming on the inside toward God? How many times have we been rude to the barista for getting a wrong drink when really there's just something wrong right here? Saul sat at home with spear in hand. David sat with harp in hand. So what do we do? What do we do when the struggle gets so real? We don't grab a spear. We don't do that. We don't throw the spear back. We keep our hand on the strings. Why? Because our worship becomes our weapon. Our worship becomes our weapon. Listen, in Psalm 59, when he writes this, based right here in the story of this interaction with King Saul, and he writes chapter 59 of Psalms, David is doing something. He actually says it in a few different ways here in the verses. Watch, let me read Psalm 59 again. Here's what listen in what David's doing. But I will sing of your strength. In the morning I will sing of your love, for you are my fortress, my refuge in times of trouble. You are my strength. I sing praise to you. You, God, are my fortress, my God, on whom I can rely. Listen, I think David knew that if he could win the battle with his soul, this inner struggle, that God would win the battle with Saul. And that entire chapter, that Psalm 59, it's so clear what David is doing in these moments when the struggle is real. In fact, a few verses before that, in the same chapter, he writes this in verse 9, you are my strength. I watch for you, God, are my fortress. You, God, are my fortress. So David isn't watching for Saul. His eyes are not fixed on Saul. His eyes are not fixed on spears that are being thrown at him. His eyes are watchful for God. So Saul has has his eyes fixed on David and killing him. David has his eyes fixed on God and worshiping him. Here's the point. You don't always get what you want in life, but you always get what you choose. You don't always get what you want in life. I think we know that. Most of us do. But you always get what you have chosen. What are you going to choose today? How do we keep our hand on the harp? How do we keep our heart at peace? We worship. We worship God through song or through lifestyle and the things that we do on a daily basis, not just on Sunday, but all throughout the week. We're living this lifestyle of worshiping God when the struggle is real. We don't grab a spear, we worship God. And I love reading through the Psalms. This book is not Psalms. Some people say that. It's Psalms. P is silent. But we read through this, and I love this, the pictures here, because listen, it's like David's struggle is meeting God's strength. And I so can relate. And in other chapters, he writes just like this. In fact, in Psalm 46, some earlier chapters, he writes some similar language. He says, God is our refuge. It's not on the screen. I'm just going to read it. Listen in. God is our refuge and strength. This is David, Psalm 46. An ever-present help in trouble. Right? Therefore, we will not fear. When should we not fear? When the earth gives way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. Here's the translation. When the struggle is so real in your life that you feel like the world is collapsing around you and there's nothing that you can do. But we remember that God is our refuge. And then just a couple more verses here. I just wrote down here, it says this, Psalm 46, verse 9, He makes wars cease. To the ends of the earth, He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. And then He says this in verse 10, Be still and know that I am God. In the middle of the struggle, be still. I gave this illustration in when I spoke in CR, and then a couple weeks ago when I spoke in the student ministry. I think sometimes in our life we're soaring, right? God has anointed us. God has called us to do something, and we're soaring, baby. It's awesome. And then we have this moment, this giant of success. You slayed it. Things are good. Only to be followed by a season of struggle. And although we know that God is our strength, what we feel like, here's what we feel like. We feel like our wings are just getting ripped, right? We feel like our wings are getting clipped. And everything in our life is just a struggle. There's a torment. There's a hardship. And it's just like, God, what's going on? Why are you here? This is not what I thought it would be like. And we kind of feel like this. And it's like, okay, I'm supposed to know that you are God and to be still in the midst of chaos, in the midst of warfare and struggle. I'm supposed to just be still. But again, He's our refuge in trouble, in the struggle, in the seasons. And so when the struggle gets real for us, what we realize, the trouble times we're training, where is God in all of this? We start to unfold that God was in fact in the struggle, in the trouble, the entire time. And whatever you face, whatever struggle, whatever difficulty you face, that He is right there in the troubled times, in the struggle. And so that's why we can say we are still, be still and know that I am God, and we worship Him. Let's all stand together and let's worship God.